Okay, let me see if the echo is gone. Basically, I build classical guitars. Are you hearing me?
I can hear you fine, yeah.
Okay, great, and the echo's gone. I build mainly classical guitars, although I have mentioned there's the echo again.
Yeah.
I had mentioned that I had built a lute guitar, and this was like 2012, 2013, and it was quite an enjoyable experience. I actually still have the mold that I made, and plan on making another one. But my biggest question when yes when making the ribs, they're like feather shaped, and in order to get them to join side by side correctly, you have to have a certain angle on the edge of each rib. And my question is there an easy way to figure that?
So I guess I don't really think of it as an angle.
The edge of each feather,
Yeah.
because
So
the bowl shape. If you have a 90-degree edge, then you end up with a little gap between each rib.
yes.
And I through trial and error, I was able to find the correct angle to match the ribs up together to where I didn't have the gap. And I was just I was curious if there was an easy way to figure that rather than uh, through the trial and error thing.
Okay, so the angle at the tail end of the lute, right? The opposite of the head, will depend on how many ribs there are. So, for instance, if you've got a lute which has, or a lute body which has 9 ribs, that would be 20 degrees. But obviously, it kind of diverges from this idea of an angle. This is because it's curving round, and obviously the
Right.
tail end is not coming to a point in the same way. So,
Right.
so basically, the way I make them meet up is not to think of them as an angle as such. So it's like how can I describe it? It's more like, so you have like a rough template, and then they're kind of, so I put a plane upside down in a vise, and then after they're bent, you kind of shape it roughly on the plane, and then do the same thing using sandpaper until they fit nicely. And it's just practice really past that point, but that's the process.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. And before when I was working on that, I tried just basic trigonometry and or yeah, basic trigonometry and tried to figure it with geometry and what have you, and it just didn't seem to work well. So basically, I think you answered my question. It is more of a trial and error to get the correct angle for them to match up with each other.
Yeah.
And
So I'm not very good at geometry, so full disclosure there. But like, this is what I meant about like they're coming to a point at this end,
right,
which is covered
exactly.
here. But so this is the only point at which it's really an angle, and then kind of as it goes, it's not. It's more like kind of an orange, right? It's being peeled.
Right,
More than an angle as such. I guess it is an angle. Everything's angles, but do you know what I mean?
right.
And another thing is quite often, this is more of an oud thing, but quite often the outermost ribs will be slightly bigger. And what that does, so there are 2 ways of doing on ouds. One is to have extra ribs to give extra depth anyway. But if you just have slightly bigger ribs on the outside, that can also basically what's the word? They'll kind of make up for that. Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
So any space that's left over will then be taken up by the slightly bigger outer ribs.
Hmm. Okay. I noticed also when I built the lute guitar that whenever I did figure out an angle that as it curved from the tailstock or what I call the tail to the neck, the angle would actually change a bit because of
Yeah.
the actual shape of the bowl itself, and
Yeah.
it is difficult, and I have to say you're doing an amazing job. And by the way, that
You're
that
too
French
kind.
polish was really nice. I like that. Could you show it to us once more?
Thank you, and thank you for helping me with that as well. We help each other, right?
Absolutely.
So this is. I've actually done one more recently, which has a slightly more inspired by your method. But yeah, this is oak and sapele. I've got one upstairs which is ash and cherry, which has a obviously slightly different combination. But yeah, there we go.
Absolutely beautiful. The lute guitar I built, it was actually oak and sapele. So
Same. Okay.
I got the same effect there with the light and dark colors. Absolutely beautiful. I love it.
Oak is underrated, I think it's fair to say.
It is. I think in the past, most lute builders kind of avoided the heavier woods, but they're finding now that by thicknessing the ribs properly, that it's actually a very very good wood, oak and walnut and stuff like that. So,
I guess
species
the
like
big,
that.
the big open pores with oak is the one downside, I'd say.
Right, right.
There's
Traditionally,
also,
traditionally, what were the lutes and ouds? What was the preferred wood for lutes and ouds?
so for lutes, you see maple, sometimes ash, sometimes basically native European woods, and particularly in the medieval period. And then as you got into the Renaissance, they started importing woods from the New World, where the New World was discovered, where you lot live, apart from Bill. And so you had things like mahogany from Brazil. Yeah, like more kind of exotic woods, as we would call them, not as you would,
Right.
that came from the Americas. But yeah, maple was a staple. There we go. Maple was a staple wood that was used for lutes. For ouds, it's more so beech, European beech. It's not European, obviously from the Middle East, but European beech is quite often used. Yeah, you'll have sapele, things like that. Usually, quite often walnut as well. So European walnut is quite commonly used on a lot of ouds, particularly the ouds that are made in Iran, which is I've done a lot of research of those particular luthiers because they build in a particular style that I like. And yeah, a lot of those are built from what I would call European walnut, but they're not Europe, so they wouldn't call it that. But yeah, but it's got that slightly lighter, more mixed color than you have. American walnut is very dark, isn't it? By contrast,
right.
Walnut and beech is another common combination for ouds as well.
Beech is very nice. I love it. It's very hard, but very easy wood to work with actually, and it has a beautiful speckling type effect.
Yes.
When you finish it, so I really love that. The third guitar that I ever built, I built for my dad, and he was a master classical guitarist, and when he passed, I actually got the guitar back. I wished I could show it to you, but I'm actually, if I go over there, I'm going to lose you. The service in my house isn't very well, but it was only my third guitar, and my dad was like my best friend, and also my worst critic, and he gave me a lot of pointers of what I did wrong and everything. But since I've gotten the guitar back, he played it despite its shortcomings. He played it quite often, and when I got the guitar back, I was like, "Wow, I don't remember this guitar sounding this well." So I believe it's very important for an instrument to be played, no matter what
Absolutely.
quality it is. And
Absolutely.
because it just improves them. It really does. And looking at the wood that I used in that guitar now, it's like, wow, I wished I'd bought up more of this wood. So beech is absolutely beautiful. And
I think in Europe. Sorry, go on.
I have quite a few wood planes that I'm very proud of, that are also made of beech, and I think plane makers are very fond of beech because it's such a hard, durable wood.
It's very stable.
Yeah.
Yes, very stable.
I think the echo was coming from me because I put a studio quality condenser mic into my iPad and it's gone now. So
great.
I have to apologise for that. I forgot I had it.
We figured it out.
Yeah, I figured it out.
Yep, I got my headphones working also.
Excellent.
Wonderful. I do have one other question on connecting the ribs. Whenever I built the lute guitar, I knew that there was some type of fabric or paper or something that they used on the inside, but the information I had was very little at the time that I was building. At the time, we didn't have good communication with other luthiers through the internet and what have you. So I ended up using a real fine weave. It's kind of like a tight weave canvas, but it was made of hemp, and I glued that to the inside where each rib would join, and it seemed to work really well, and it's held together really well. But traditionally, what is used there, or what do you use?
So are we talking about lutes or ouds? Because they use different things generally.
Lutes or ouds, either one. I think basically the construction is pretty close to the same.
Well, so I'd say the construction of the medieval lute and the oud is quite similar, but it diverged. Like the Renaissance lute starts to have a angled neck join and all sorts of different things, and they have different neck joins anyway, because the lute traditionally had a metal, an iron nail through the neck block, whereas ouds will have a dovetail, or some other makers will use a dowel. Anyway, I'm sorry. The paper or other things in lutes, it would traditionally be basically any sort of scrap fabric or paper that they would have had. Obviously, in those days, paper was more expensive, so it was more commonly some sort of scrap fabric. But there's been, museum lutes which have kind of old documents which have been cut up to be used for the inside of these lute bodies. So I guess the answer is whatever they could get hold of was used on lutes. But yeah, generally some sort of scrap fabric or paper, or parchment paper, actually, quite often. In modern times, lute makers, will use parchment paper generally, acid-free parchment paper. In terms of ouds, so the most modern thing for ouds is to use a bit of paper strip which has like an advert for the maker, and it functions like a label on the joins. So they'll have I've seen Iraqi makers, for instance, who have their Facebook page pasted all the way down the joints. Yeah, I know, right?
Oh, cool.
Cool. So yeah, just paper, I guess, is the answer. But
now, how do you manage to do your research into these instruments from different countries, Joe? Do you have to visit museums in the countries, or do you manage to access them in this country?
So yeah, the internet and visiting museums in other countries, and also in terms of the historical instruments, museums in this country too. So
yeah, you've been to the Edinburgh Museum of Historical Instruments.
I have not.
They let you take measurements. You have to be accompanied when you go in there, but they've got a sample of nearly every instrument, so it's quite a nice place to get to. It's central.
I'll pay a visit. Yeah, cool.
What museum is that again?
It's the Edinburgh Museum of Historical Musical Instruments in Edinburgh, Scotland.
Ah, cool.
You have to book an appointment, and you have to be accompanied by a member of the library staff, but they let you examine the instruments and take measurements, and they sell plans for ones that people have taken measurements from.
Very nice. Very nice.
Cool.
So how much does the back of a lute affect the sound? Is it basically just a reflective disc, or if you use different woods, does it affect the sound?
Everything affects the sound.
Right.
But I'd say, yeah, most of the sound comes from the soundboard. So it affects the sound, but
because on a guitar, you can definitely tell a mahogany back and sides has a different sound than a rosewood back and sides. And if you build your back really stiff and just to be reflective, it's different than if you build it a little bit looser so it can vibrate.
So I think this is also further complicated by the tendency of ouds and lutes to have alternating ribs. Because then you've got two factors.
Right.
So, I'm just trying to think really. In terms of ouds, I guess my preference is generally for harder and therefore more reflective woods. Seem to work quite well. But then again, European walnut works really well, and that's not the hardest of woods. And I guess in my experience also, smaller instruments like Baroque mandolins work really well made out of cherry. And that's obviously a very soft wood. So soft in terms of character, not as in like spruce or pine. But so I don't know is the answer. I think it really depends on the instrument you're building.
It's very interesting that you mentioned you tend to go more for the reflective woods and stuff, and it seems to me that like a combination of ebony and maple, hard maple, would actually be better for a lute, in my opinion, except for maybe the weight.
Yes, so I mean, I wouldn't use ebony personally because as a matter of principle, I don't tend to use endangered woods. So
Right.
Plus, you'd have a hard time finding a piece of ebony big enough to cut those ribs nowadays.
Exactly, yeah, that too.
It's actually not too bad to find suppliers. There's quite a few that have ebony that comes with the CITES certificate. So you can find them if you look.
Okay.
But people are moving away from it to use the alternatives, and a lot of the big guitar firms now don't use ebony fingerboards. They use the Richlite and Rocklight type things that are composite wood that's dyed. They dye the chippings and glue them together, or the dust, and it feels just like ebony.
Yeah, I've come across that. I wonder also if I did get the ebony which had the paperwork with it, would I then even be able to export it? I think the USA would have a problem about CITES and all that.
America's a problem with everything. I went to the Martin Guitar Factory and I wanted to buy them mother of pearl inlays, and they wouldn't sell me them because I don't live in America, and they said, we're just not going to sell you them. Even though mother of pearl isn't an endangered species, they said American customs will just impound everything you've got that's instrument related. So, it's just, it's very, very, very difficult to get through customs. I mean,
so we have a question here in the chat. Bohannan Guitars asks, how much does the bowl shape affect sound over a flat back? I have my opinions on that, but anyone else want to chip in on that?
I think with the principles of physics, when you get colliding sound waves inside the sound box, then I think that's the reason why, like on guitars, you have a different radius on the front to the back, so it creates more peak wave collisions. So I've always wondered how a fixed bowl back instrument, how it really works, because you will tend to get standing wave, I think, because it's not, well, that's just my opinion. I can't explain it in terms of physics, but I'd be interested to hear somebody else's opinion.
The that is very interesting because like I mentioned before, I built a lute guitar, and while it still sounded very much like a classical, mainly because the top was fan braced, I believe, but it also had a certain amount of echo to it, and
That's a standard wave, I think.
yeah, it's kind of like a built-in reverb or what have you, and I've noticed that a lot of most bowl back type instruments like lutes and outs, and between even between the lute and owl, you have very different sound, which probably contributed to the type of strings used, maybe the bracing, top thicknessing and stuff, but you still get that bit of echo from the coming through the sound hole. It's almost like well, an extreme example of it would be like singing through a pipe or something, or a tube. You get that kind of a tonal response out of it. I don't know if that was such a good example, really.
No, I think
Well,
I
it makes
understand what you
sense.
mean. I've
Does it-
played
does it
instruments that have that kind of sound.
But it's a very it's a very desirable
does a
sound.
Tornavos do something similar?
Not so much. A Tornavos, it actually condenses and compresses the sound, I think, so somewhat, and it reaches out to an audience a little better. But there is a downside of that. I've experimented with Tornavos, as you know, and the best sounding Tornavos reaches nearly to the back of the guitar or the back of the instrument. And it really reaches out, to the back of the audience, per se, but at the same time, the player suffers. The guitar don't seem to be as loud to the guitar player. So I kind of have my, it's kind of like, well, should I use it or should I not? So I'm to the point now to where I'm like, no, I'm not going to use it anymore unless it's requested, by a customer or something.
So if I could share my opinion on this question, I've come across a lot of flat-backed ouds, particularly that are made in Turkey, and in my opinion, they just don't have that oud sound. They're really lacking something, and so yeah, I'd say it makes a massive difference. The shape of a bowl versus flatback. It's difficult to put into words. How do you put a sound into words? I know we try and do this all the time, but in my opinion, it makes a massive difference. And I guess it's also, if you compare, for instance, a baroque mandolin to something like a taro patch ukulele, probably the closest flatback equivalent. It's a completely different sound, and so. How much does the bowl shape affect versus flashback? My answer is a lot.
I think
it's an incredible amount of effect that it has on it, and I agree with you 100% on the difference between the flatback lute and the bowl back. The flatback it's just not as desirable. I mean, yeah, people have them, people play them, but it's like okay, it's kind of like the difference between Queen Anne and a peasant per se.
I think they're
it
designed
probably
for traveling, aren't they? Really?
Yeah, sorry, it probably depends on the pitch of the instrument, the length of the sound wave, because obviously the lower the pitch, the longer the sound wave, and you've got to think of the distance between the front and the back of the instrument, because it's going to reflect off the back and bounce back. So I think if you were very, very clever and you had the skills to do it, you could probably work out the depth of the sound box and how deep it needs to be to optimize the sound of the sound wave that's inside the instrument. And maybe if you took some of these instruments that don't sound so good and tuned them differently, they might get a better response from them.
Yeah,
And there's a lot of university research done. People do PhDs on this type of thing. So if you've got the facilities, when I used to go to the Cambridge Violin School, one of the woman's husband was a professor at Cambridge, and he had a lot of friends who used to come along and do technical demonstrations. They were all violin makers, but they'd come along and do technical demonstrations with equipment they'd made themselves using oscilloscopes and homemade pickups, and they demonstrate sound waves and how they move inside the sound box. So it's an area that's still probably a lot of scope to do research on it.
Yeah.
I've had pretty good results with guitars if I make the back a parabolic shape with the center of the parabola right behind the sound hole. So lengthwise it's bent that way, as it is. All of my guitars are arched side to side. But if I do it that way, it seems to project more right out through the sound hole, maybe similar to the back of a lute, but less pronounced.
Well, you know, the test of a guitar is you put a lighter or a match in the sound hole and tap the top and see if it blows the flame out.
Right.
That's what all the really top guys do. So mine don't do
that. I'm glad you guys brought this up, because the way that I've built classical guitars in the past is the back just perfectly flat, and my more recent guitars I have started using my Solara board, my work board, to actually put a little arch in the back as well. The same amount as the top, and it has made a difference. It actually projects a little better. And I don't think it's just my ear, because I've had others comment on it too. They play one of my flatback guitars, and then they play one that has it's a very slight amount. It's only like 2 millimeter doming of the back, like the top, and there's definitely a difference. And people with a well-trained ear can pick up on that, and others not so much. It's like you can really tell the difference between somebody that has really been into playing the classical guitar for a long time, as opposed to someone that is rather new to it, because they're the ones that pick up on the difference, and not
definitely
so much.
Definitely makes a difference on steel string guitars. You can definitely hear the difference. And mine is much more pronounced. I do a 15-foot radius on the back, side to side, and then I put a board under the sound hole and bend it, and then mark my sides. So I truly have that parabolic projection kind of right behind the sound hole.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. It would have more of effect.
Yeah, you could just
pretty standard for the back, I think, Michael. Most guitar makers use a 15-foot radius on the back. So what do you use on the top?
I use either a 15-foot or a 20-foot radius on the top, and it's perfectly straight and flat back to front, along the neckline. But the whole guitar is curved like this, so it's not really a cone. I forget what you call it. It's a cylinder, basically. And it's about a 20-foot radius on my bigger guitars, on my dreadnought types, and a 15-foot I actually like that better. But I keep that dead flat and the neck plane dead flat, and then I angle my fretboard to get the bridge height.
Okay.
My neck joint is always 90 degrees because it's just a lot easier to make.
Yeah.
And then you don't have to bend down the fingerboard and all that stuff. Everything is just dead flat across the top of that body all the way to the end of the neck. Then a fingerboard goes on with an angle carved in it to achieve my correct bridge height.
So
It's similar to what you...
Sorry, so you adjust the action by having a curve in the fingerboard?
No, I angle the fingerboard from end to end. For instance, usually on a steel string, the top end will be a bit thicker than at the nut, so that I get a good height, so I don't have to mess around with my neck angle. And it's something I learned from flamenco guitar builders who often do it the other way around because they want the strings really low at the bridge. So they actually plane their fingerboard where it's thinner at the body than it is at the nut. Mine are the opposite.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm familiar with. Yeah, interesting.
So I built a jig. It just runs through the drum sander and cuts the angle that I want.
Cool.
Talking about top dome and everything, that brings up a question for you, Joe. On your lutes, do you put any dome in them, or is it just a flat top?
So how can I explain this? So for lutes, they don't have a dome inbuilt, but what happens is under the string tension, it will form almost like an S shape.
Okay, yes.
And that's meant to happen. I know it sounds a bit scary, but because the soundboard of a lute is so thin, ouds don't have this thing, but like lutes, basically, because it's so thin, it's designed that it's meant to form this slight S curve. It's very slight, but it's there, and so I guess there's the answer. Right.
Okay.
Jason,
I've actually had a very well-known classical guitarist that I met through my dad years ago tell me that the S shape is very desirable even in classical guitars. He explained that, and until you get that S shape, the guitar, the potential of the guitar has really not opened up yet.
Interesting.
They say that about old Martins as well. They get that belly like behind the bridge from the constant string tension. And
yes.
They sound better after they get that dome.
I have to say I've got a belly as I've got older too.
Yeah, so they changed the design of the Martins, Michael. So they now have a support underneath where the fingerboard goes, the fretboard goes over the top. They've added a support, so it's like that, and that bit's under the top, because a lot of the old Martins they were actually so much string pressure they were caving the top of the instrument in. So I bought a Martin kit a few years ago, so I saw the bits and how they were. So it was a common problem. People just try and reset the necks without really addressing the problem that's causing the thing to cave in the first place.
Right.
I always put a very stiff brace, actually a board, about the width of the fretboard and probably 3/4 of an inch thick, and it goes all the way from the neck block to the first upper brace.
Okay.
So it's really all that tension is being pushed up to that, and I make that top brace very tall, like 3/4 of an inch, really stout.
Big, yeah.
I caught that from Erwin Samogi. Talks about that a lot in his book, so that it can't push down like that, being glued to that upper brace.
Interesting. Okay, sorry, go on.
My apologies, Joe. On lutes and ouds, they're mainly ladder braced. I think one of the braces may be angled in some of the instruments, but am I correct in saying that, or is there ouds and lutes that actually use fan bracing like I did on the lute guitar?
So ouds are they're kind of close to ladder braced, but not in the historical guitar sense. So the braces don't meet and go like that. They're kind of all perpendicular. Is that the word?
Right.
1 second. Here's one I made earlier. So yeah, so they're all like across there.
Right.
And as opposed to, if you think about a lot of kind of pre-Torres classical guitars, when they talk about ladder bracing, it would be kind of more like that. Does that make sense?
Right. Right. It does.
Yeah, ouds are straight across, generally speaking. There's some modern ouds where they've experimented with all sorts of different things, particularly Turkish ones. They've experimented with these things. Lutes are not. Lutes have a weird kind of thing where the top half will be similar to an oud, but much lighter, and obviously the soundboard's quite different. It's much thinner as well. But then on the last, you see, yeah. So basically, below the brace about here, where the bridge is, you'll have one brace which generally kind of curves round, and then a few which are kind of, how can I put it? They're almost fan bracing, but not, because there's only like 2 of them. And then you've got the curvy one. So loop bracing's a bit weird, but yeah.
Cool. What is a good source for plans for like lutes? That it seems that plans for lutes are very difficult to come by. Do
It's
you
funny
have any?
should ask that. I have a good source for them. It's me.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool.
I've previously been asked to draw up some plans for my lutes and ouds, so I have some. If you want them, they are available for sale. I've also, yeah, there are other makers that will.
Do you have those? Do you have those on your website to where I could view them and choose from?
No,
what
they're
you
not
have
on my
available?
website, but if you message me, we'll sort that out
Okay.
afterwards. No problem.
Okay.
So I guess, yeah, plenty of other makers will also have lute plans. That's quite common. In terms of oud plans, they're less common, but mainly because a lot of makers use the shape of their bow or the shape of their body as kind of their signature. Whereas obviously lutes are based on historical examples, so the plan will be drawn up from a museum example or something, whereas ouds will be more individual. Every maker is slightly different, and so the plans are therefore less kind of shared, and there's a bit of kind of, I think a lot of oud luthiers would see it as part of the process of learning to build an oud is figuring out your shape.
Right. Okay.
So, but there are oud plans as well. There's just less of them.
That makes a lot of sense now that you mention it, because many of the lutes that I have actually been able to get my hands on and examine and everything, it's like every one of them has been different in some way or the other. Usually the bowl shape, and I'm almost certain that like you said, the bowl shape pretty much determines everything else, the way they're braced and everything.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you on the older instruments they had like an iron nail connecting the neck, and whereas the more modern or have a dovetail. Is that what you use as well?
So I use a dovetail on both my lutes and my ouds. I previously used a screw, a long screw into the neck, which was a lot of makers use a screw because on lutes because it kind of mimics the idea of having a nail driven into it, which was the historical method. But nowadays, yeah, I use dovetails on both instruments because it's a much superior and stronger joint, in my opinion.
Right.
A lot of oud makers will also use instead like a dowel that goes through the neck, and I've done lots of repairs on ouds where that kind of fails because it's just not. Again, I think a dovetail is a superior joint, so that's what I do when I build them.
When I built the lute guitar, I made a joint that it was similar to a dovetail, although it was straight if you follow.
Yeah.
And as it passed through the neck block, with it being straight, just a straight joint, through the front underneath the soundboard, I drilled 2 holes each side of the tendon that went through, and placed dials in that way to lock it in. And
Okay.
I feel like that was a pretty good
So you had
joint.
a raised fingerboard.
I'm sorry.
So you had like a raised fingerboard to cover that up?
Yes, there's a raised fingerboard, and I feel like it was a pretty good joint. Although the dovetail I feel is probably well, it is superior, like you said, in the case of building ouds and lutes. Of course, in 2012, 2013, I had never built one of these, and it's the only one I've ever built. So I was kind of like, well, how do I do this? How do I do that?
I'm sure there'll be more of
That
them
sort of
coming soon. So we've been going for about an hour.
Okay.
I didn't expect it to go for more than half an hour, so that's cool. That's really good. Yeah, so minus the technical difficulties, which took up some time, we've been going about an hour. I guess, is there anything else that anybody wanted to share, or should we move towards wrapping up? It's entirely up to you.
Yeah, we could wrap up if you like, and think about if we want to.
I know.
Now we've got to know each other. We could think about having another one again.
Yes, and hopefully it'll go better next time, and I won't have my
I think it
computer
was my
deciding to
fault
throw a tantrum at the wrong time.
Yeah, it's my fault. The echo. So.
Well, mine as well.
It would be great to have these in the future and have more members join us for discussion.
Let's make this a regular thing. Yeah, definitely. It's good fun.
And Michael,
absolutely, thank you.
I'll send Michael some photos if I can when I rehair some bows about tips on rehairing.
That'd be great.
I've done quite a lot.
Well,
I've done about 20 over the last year and a half, so I'm kind of getting in the zone now with bows. It's kind of all I'm doing at the moment.
And you're building them from scratch, right? The bows?
Yes. Yeah.
Very impressive.
I have a good friend was a bow maker in San Diego, and he told me that all bow makers are crazy as a loon. And I said, well, that's true of luthiers in general.
I was going to say,
a Polish man, and he was absolutely. He used to do this all the time. Oh, you crazy Pole! Oh, But he was a great guy, and he used to drink he drinks like a fish. So, yeah, bow makers are all crazy. It's one of the.
Well, it's such delicate work. It's just.
It's disgustingly expensive to buy bow wood if you can get it. So, you want to be really careful with it. All mine's recycled from fence posts and railway sleepers in Brazil, so you can't actually buy new stuff anymore.
Yep,
Okay.
I've been buying wood for 30 years, and I'm glad I have, because now I have some really nice wood that you can't buy anymore.
I'm the same. I'm trying to sell mine because I'm age 70 now, so I realised half the instruments I was going to build, I'm never going to get to build them. So I've been looking for people to sell.
Send me a message after this, and we'll sort something out.
Well, actually,
Yeah.
you're not too far away. Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
haven't been to London since 2016, so I could easily carry some on the train. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you, all of you, for joining me. This has been good fun.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you for
Thank you.
hosting.
Thank you.
My laptop
Thanks
here,
for setting
that's
it
why I'm
up.
looking at the chat. But thank you to everyone who's been watching and listening, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And yeah, we'll do this again because it's good fun if you're up for it. And to those in the comments, think of questions for next time.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.